Exactly 1 year ago, I launched the Prog School with a video called 10 Odd Time Signatures You Need to Know, or 10 Odd Meters You Need to Know. And I talked about 10 odd time signature rhythms that I hear being used all the time that I think everyone listening or writing this style of music should know and understand. So for the 1 year anniversary here, I thought it'd be fun to do a tier list of time signatures. Now, this is just a silly video, so don't take it too seriously. But here on this list, I've got your common time signatures on the left, and then some more odd time signatures on the right. Now, this isn't obviously covering every time signature because you could do like 257/16 or something like that. I just wanted to cover a lot of the basic ones that I see being used a lot. Now, keep in mind, I use all these time signatures all the time. I write in every single one of these all the time. No one is really better than the other. Some of them I find a little more inspiring, so that's how I'm going to kind of rank these. But even if one's lower, doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that maybe I like a different one better. And you can make your own tier list of these if you've used all these time signatures, and let me know. Let me know if you think my list is terrible. Just tell me, because it might be. But to me, this is what my list is going to be, at least right now. I haven't even thought about this at all. I'm just going for it. Also, I'm not going to do like 11/16 or 13/16. You could get really big on the denominators, right? I could do 11/64 or something like that. But really, 11 to me, when I'm talking about 11, for instance, it's just going to be talking about 11 in general. 11/8, 11/16, 11/4. I kind of think of them similarly as far as like how you can divide it. Just depending on the tempo is why you might call something 11/8 or 11/16, for example. So let's get right into this with the most common of all time signatures. All right, so starting off with 4/4. Now, you might think because I'm a prog guy and this is the Prog School that 4/4 is going to be an F down at the bottom, right? Who writes in 4/4? You're not prog if you're writing 4/4, but that's not true. 4/4 is the most useful time signature out there. There's a reason why it's the most common one you hear. And there's so much you can do with 4/4 to make it more interesting. So many different kinds of grooves and styles. And, we grow up with 4/4 all the time, all around us. So it's easy to kind of think of it as just, it's 4/4, whatever. But I love 4/4 and I write in 4/4 all the time, way more than you would think. And I find it incredibly, incredibly useful. But it's also not maybe the most interesting time signature. So I'm going to give 4/4 a good solid B. But if you write prog or you play prog, do not shy away from 4/4. It's very useful. Very, very useful. 3/4. Now, 3/4 to me is... I don't use it as often. I think... I kind of always think of 3/4 as like a waltz one. Obviously, 3/4 has a lot more uses outside of that. And I like to combine 3/4 with other time signatures. Like I would do 2 measures of 4 and a measure of 3, for example, to get different odd combinations. But 3/4 by itself, kind of grooving on 3/4, it's not something I do a ton. It does happen occasionally, but I'm going to put 3/4 as a D. It's fine. It's usable, but for me, maybe not the best. Okay, 2/4. Now, 2/4 is kind of like half of 4/4, and any time signature with a lower numerator, like 2, 3, 1, I find myself not using those as often. Maybe like in a transition part where I want to just add a couple beats, I might use a 2/4, but a lot of what I do with 2/4 would just end up happening in 4/4 anyway, as far as like writing stuff out. So I'm going to put 2/4 as a D. It's fine. It's usable. Now 6/8. I'm a big fan of 6/8. I think 6/8 grooves are really cool, and a lot of my favorite songs end up being in 6/8, especially ones that are more on the basic side. But I love the feel of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, that kind of 6/8 groove. Really good for epic moments and for ballads. So I'm going to put 6/8 above 4/4. As far as your common time signatures go, I tend to like 6/8 the most. When I hear a good song in 6/8, a good groove in 6/8, I'm a big fan. Now, 12/8. 12/8 I think of very similar to 4/4, is that you have 4 beats, but they're triplet beats. Or compound beats, so you'd have 3 notes per beat. So a lot of the same things that I said about 4/4 would apply to 12/8. Incredibly useful, so many different things you can do with it. And I am a big fan of the compound feel, right? I think of big like triplet grooves, that kind of stuff with double bass is cool. And also you have shuffle grooves are in 12/8. So I'm going to put 12/8 with 4/4 because I kind of think of those as being 2 sides of the same coin. A common time signature, just kind of changing the way you feel those 4 beats. And lastly, we have cut time here. And cut time is not one that I find myself using. I don't know if I've ever used it really. It does have its place, especially when tempos get faster. That's kind of like the common use for it in notation. But for me, even when I'm writing fast tempos, I don't really think about doing cut time at all. I don't think it has a much of a place in the kind of music that I do and the way that I write anyway. Not that it's completely useless, but just for myself, not one I ever find myself using. So I'm going to throw that as E. All right, let's move on to the odd time signatures. All right, 6/4, and 6/4 isn't really an odd time signature. I kind of have it between the common and odd time signatures because 6/4 can be used like an odd time signature a little bit if you're doing it, treating it more like 4/4 with a couple added beats. But it also can be used similar to 6/8, as a 2 groups of 3 kind of a thing. 6/4 is good, and it's one that I find myself using occasionally, especially as like in combination with other things. Just kind of like I'd use 3/4. Like you could do a measure of 4/4 and a measure of 6/4. That's a really kind of common combination to give you 10 total, something that's a little more odd. So useful, but not one I find myself writing in by itself very often. So I'm going to put that in the C, right down the middle. 5/4. 5/4 is really great. It's one of the most common odd time signatures. I talked about it in my 10 odd meters you need to know video. I had a couple different combinations of using 5/4. The most common one being the Mission Impossible rhythm, which is 2 groups of 2 and 1 group, or 2 groups of 3 and 2 groups of 2. And 5/4 is one of those ones that, I think someone starting out writing an odd time signature should try to use. It's one of the most common ones. Pretty easy to feel if you group it the right way, and incredibly useful. So I'm going to put 5/4 in the B tier. I think as far as odd time signatures go, it's a great one, but it's a pretty basic one on the odd time signature side of things. All right, 7/4. Now, I love anything with a 7 numerator. I think 7 is probably the best feeling odd time signature if I had to like put one out there. So for 7/4, it's one that I use all the time. I use 7/8, 7/4. I use these all the time. I kind of think of them as almost like common time signatures to me anyway. They feel so natural and they can groove so hard. So many songs written in 7. I think it's the most common one I hear. 7 in, so either 7/4 or 7/8. It's the most common time signature I hear, odd time signature I hear, especially in prog. So I'm going to put 7/4 as an A tier. I think it's great. 9/4. All right, so 9/4 is less common than 7/4, but 9/4 can be really good as well because you can do like a combination of 4/4 and 5/4 can equal a 9/4. But because it's a bigger time signature, there's more things you can do within it. And with these longer time signatures, I think there's a lot more ways to make them feel more natural. You have more space to kind of give things a more basic groove. And 9/4 is really great. It can be difficult if you're just using 9/4 because it's a longer time signature to kind of plan everything out well. But I do find myself using 9 fairly often. I'm going to throw that in the B tier as well. This B tier is getting full. I wonder if anything's going to make it in the F tier. I haven't even thought about this yet, but we'll see. Here we go, 3/8. Now, I mentioned with the lower denominator or lower numerators, I had a hard time using them sometimes. And 3/8 is really difficult because it goes by so quickly, especially if your tempo's faster. So the only time I'd really probably use 3/8 is if I was doing like if I had a run and I needed to add 3 extra eighth notes or something like that. Either I would add those 3 extra eighth notes onto the original time signature. So if I had 4/4, I'd add 3 eighth notes to that and make it 11/8. Or I might just do a whole separate measure of 3/8 just to kind of fill in the gaps. But it's too short of a time to really groove in, and there's no, you wouldn't be able to read it very well either, especially at a faster tempo. So 3/8 is, it's not terribly useful outside of being like a transition sort of thing. So I'm actually going to throw 3/8 in the E tier. I thought about putting that in the F tier, but I don't think I can put it lower than cut time. Actually, you know what? Watch this. I'm changing my mind. Boom. Cut time, because I don't think it's incredibly useful for modern music. Cut time's going in the F tier, because I think 3/8's better than using cut time. All right, 5/8. Now, 5/8 suffers from kind of a similar thing as 3/8, and where I think there's not a ton of time to use. It goes by pretty quickly, but it's more useful than 3/8 because it's a little bit longer. And I enjoy 5/8 grooves. I think can be really cool. Something like I did write a really cool piece in 5/8 for my 10 odd time signatures video that was like a quintuplet swing kind of a thing. I really like how that turned out. Definitely usable, not something I'd probably live in for long periods of time, and oftentimes I would just combine two groups of 5/8 and make a measure of 5/4 just to make it easier to read anyway. So 5/8 I'm going to put 5/8 as a D tier, just because I think the short amount of time makes it a little hard to use. All right, 7/8. I mentioned how much I really enjoy 7, and 7/8 is probably the most commonly used odd time signature. It's the first one I talked about in that video, for a reason, because I think it's the one I hear the most often. The 2 groups of 2 and 1 group of 3 version of 7/8 that's kind of like, that gives instant prog to me. Anytime I hear that, I'm like, man, that's prog, right? Right off the bat. If I write something in that grouping of 7/8, it's always going to sound like prog. So for the Prog School time signature tier list, 7/8, it's going at the top. Hey, we've got every single category filled here now. That was my goal, to fill them all up. At least I was hoping I was going to be able to do that. Anyway, let's see. 9/8. Now, 9/8 I'm actually a big fan of, because 9/8 you can treat like an odd time signature. You could do 3 groups of 2 and 1 group of 3, for instance, which is a really cool odd groove. But you can also do 9/8 as 3 groups of 3. So it can kind of sound like a 3/4 bar, but just with 3 notes per beat, like a compound meter, like a triplet version of 3/4 instead. And you can go back and forth between those two feels a lot. So 9/8 is incredibly useful. I find myself using it a lot, and I'm a big fan of the way it sounds. Like I'm working on a song right now where I have 9/8, and I'm weaving between the odd feeling and the more straightforward feeling of how you're grouping it, and it's really cool. I think it's pretty inspiring to write in if you know how to use it. So I'm actually going to throw 9/8, I think, up in the A tier. Okay, 11/8. Now 11's great. 11 I think of often as like a combination of 6 and 5. So you could do like 2 measures of 6/8 and cut off the last 8th note on the second measure, and you'd get 11/8. You'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bam. Those sorts of things I've found myself doing a lot over the years. Now 11 it's not my favorite of the odd time signatures, but I think it has some good uses. A lot of times I'll do like 4/4 and then maybe tack on 3 beats and you get 11/8. That's another way I might use 11/8. So 11/8, I think I'm going to put, this is tough. I think I'm going to put it in the C tier. It's right between B and C for me, but the C tier is a little empty. So we're putting 11/8 down there. I like 11/8 a lot. I think it's great, but it's not like my most used one. Oh, 13. I love 13. 13/8, 13/16. And usually I kind of do this as like a combination of 7 and 6. And this is one I hear all the time, especially combining 7 and 6 together to get 13. It's one that's always worked well for me. It's worked good for writing things that are more melodic. It's good for like kind of more out there proggy stuff. 13 is awesome. And I'm going to put 13 in the S tier. 15/8. Now 15/8 is cool, and it's similar to 9/8 is you could do it like an odd time signature. Like I often think of 15/8 as 2 measures of 4/4 with 1 8th note cut off. Like it's kind of like an easy way to think about it. But you can also do it as 5 groups of 3, so you could do 5 compound beats, or you could also do 3 groups of 5, which is another really cool way to view 15. So, and I love time signatures that have multiple ways that you can use them like that. So 15 for me is going to go up in the A tier. Not, one of my absolute favorites, but it's one I really enjoy. Look at this. I'm a positive guy. Like we got all this top area filled up. I like so many of these time signatures. 17/8. Now 17/8, I actually have a piece on my debut solo album, The Ascent. It's called Solar Storm, and it's entirely in 17/8. And it was super fun to write. I think one cool thing about 17 is such a big number that you can divide it in so many different ways, and I kind of really messed with all the ways to divide it that I could possibly think of. And it was really fun to put that together, and I think it ended up being pretty cool. But 17 is kind of hard because it's such a big number. And I think an easy way to do 17 would be 2 measures of 4/4 and just add a beat, something like that. So you'd have like 4/4 plus 9/8, and that would be cool. 17/8, that would be a pretty common way to use it. I do like bigger numbers because you have more options, but that can also be difficult to deal with sometimes. So I'm going to put 17/8 on the B tier. So there we have it. All right, so there's my time signature tier list. I'm curious how you guys would rank these. If you have experience with these different time signatures, please let me know in the comments where you'd rank all of these. And this is just how I was feeling right now. You know, that's subject to change every day probably. But as I mentioned before, I use all of these all the time, except for cut time. That's why it's down in the F tier. But I use these time signatures everywhere, and all of them are great. You know, I have entire songs in 4/4, which I really love to do, and then there's also songs which never go in 5/4, and that's fun as well. It's just a tool, just like anything. Time signatures are a tool, and even if you don't know that you're writing in an odd time signature, or you don't know what to call it, it doesn't matter. If you're making music, you know, it's good. It's good no matter what it is. And just because you use one of the, you know, time signatures at the top of my list here, just because you write something in 13/8 doesn't mean it's going to be good. There's a lot of bad music in 13/8 too. So the time signature doesn't really determine the quality of anything. It's just I find certain ones to be really fun to use. So that's kind of why I rank them the way they are. Thank you so much, everyone who's watched this channel over the last year. It's been really fun to do this. It's been a lot of work, but it's been super rewarding. And it's great to kind of dig into this kind of music, and I love getting comments from people about, you know, hey, thank you so much for analyzing the, you know, and kind of digging deep on this style of music. I know it's a niche subject, but I feel like the community here is really great, and the people who like what I do are very serious about it, and I try to, as much as possible, you know, reach back out to you guys. So always feel free to email me your questions or comment, like any of this stuff. Like I will try to answer everything I possibly can until my channel gets too big where I can't do that, which is hopefully will come at some point. But if you like what I do and you want to see this channel grow and be able to push things even further than where they are, then please like and subscribe, hit the bell notification, share it with your friends, all that kind of stuff. I can't do any of this without you, and I'm really looking forward to this next year of the Prog School. And I will see you guys next week with another video. Till then, stay proggy.